Howdy, guys. I'm Aiden, and welcome back to the Archive channel. Today, we are doing something a little bit fun. I'm doing a quiz of Pokemon, specifically the first four generations. And my goal is to get 498 Pokemon named in only 20 minutes. You may be doing a little bit of the math in your head and be like, Aiden, that's really hard to do. You have four generations. You're essentially trying to get each one done in 5 minutes, on top of the Mega Evolutions, on top of Melmetal and Meltan. How on earth is that possible? And the short answer is a lot of practice. I've been doing these quizzes every day for the past month or so. It started out just by naming the Kanto Pokemon, and then I went to Johto, and then Hoenn, and then started learning Sinnoh, and I'm like, shit, bro, that's like half at least. Uh, why not go ahead and try getting that time down a little bit more? So we started first four generations in 30 minutes was the initial goal. And after I got that done, I'm like, let's try 25. Be a little dangerous. And started getting those frequently enough that we're finally here attempting the 20-minute run, which is crazy. If you're trying to keep track, the goal essentially, having done the math, 498 divided by 20 means that I have to get 25 Pokemon a minute. By the time we reach the 10-minute mark, we want 249 Pokemon, which is, 151 and then 100. Pretty much two generations worth done by that point. Which, 60 seconds. You're trying to get like essentially a Pokemon every 2 or 3 seconds. And I'm not that great of a typer. As you can clearly see, I stumble every now and then. But for the most part, so long as you build enough connections in your head, the going from one Pokemon to another is actually fairly easy the more you do it. So for Generation 1, for example, right? The starters, then you get the bugs. Then you go Pidgeline, Spearoline, Ekans, which leads to other poison types. So I did Venonat, Venomoth, Grimer, Muck, Coughing, Wheezing. Then you do Pikachu, and it's like, okay, there's only 3 electric type lines in Generation 1. There's Pikachu, Raichu, Magnemite, Magneton, and then Voltorb, Electrode. Fairly easy. Fire, only 3 fire lines in Kanto. So Vulpix, Ninetales, Growlithe, Arcanine, Ponyta, Rapidash. Fairly easy. And you have some where there's only like one line for the whole type. So like Dragon only has Dragonite. Ghost only has Gengar. Fairly simple, right? However, the most abundant type in Generation 1 by far is water. And you can see me going through all of those. You got Psychic, Golduck, Staryu, Starmie, which I typically try to remember through Missy's gym. Then you have the 2 main fish, so Goldeen Seaking, Magikarp, Gyarados. Tentacruel kind of goes into the poisons. Then Sealand, Dugong, Shelter, and Cloyster I kind of remember a little bit from the Ice Elite Four, but they're also part water. Krabby Kingler's a tough one. I usually remember it through the anime, where Ash has one, or if you're doing Hoenn and you come across Crawdaunt, you know that there's only like really 2 crab lines in the first 4 generations. So getting one kind of helps you remember the other a little bit. So that's nice. Grass, there's not many. There's the Weepinbell line as well as the Oddish line. And you'll see here that in some cases I'm hopping over to Johto because generations 1 and 2 have a lot of interconnected Pokemon. And I think that's the fun, really, of doing this quiz with the first 4 generations in specific. When you get to Generation 5, they have a clean slate. They're all new Pokemon, so there's nothing connected. But Sinnoh and Johto, especially, have a bunch of evolutions to prior existing Pokemon, as well as baby forms of them as well. So when you get somebody in Kanto, it's important to remember, hey, I got Magnemite and Magneton, but can you remember Magnezone? Rhyhorn and Rhydon are fairly easy, but can you remember Rhyperior? Tangle is a one-off, and that's hard to remember. It's even harder to remember that Tangrowth exists, right? And then you have lines that stretch across 3 different generations. So you go Magmar in Gen 1, Magby in Gen 2, Magmortar in Gen 4, Porygon. You got Porygon in Gen 1, Porygon 2 in Gen 2, and Porygon Z in Gen 4. So trying to remember all those connections, I think, is fun. The nice thing is that it's easier to remember them when you have all these Pokemon in front of you, as opposed to just doing solo quizzes of each individual generation. Like, I can do Kanto and Hoenn by themselves, no problem. Sinnoh in particular is really tough because about 18 of the 100 are evolutions to previous lines. And when you don't have the previous lines in front of you, you just got to remember all those random evolutions like back to back. And that's really tough when you don't have them in front of you. Similarly, Johto has babies and one stage evolutions all over the place. There's so many one-offs in Gen 2's Pokedex that are related to other Pokemon or just goofy by themselves. I kind of have a group that I like to remember as the S Pokemon. So you have Sudowoodo, Smeargle, and Shuckle. Then you have some of the Gen 9 and Gen 8 evolutions. So I remember Dunsparce, Corsola, and Girafarig kind of all together because they got evolutions way later on. Then you have the Ice Boys, right? Sneasel and Gligar, along with Delibird, Swinub and Piloswine, which then kind of leads into some of the Gen 4 guys like Mamoswine, Gliscor, Weavile, all those boys as well. So yeah, that just sort of interconnected nature is really fun and helps me form better connections. Like here's one I just did there. Scyther. Okay, you got Scizor, but then you do Pinsir, and it's like Pinsir doesn't really have an evolution, but Johto, similar to Kanto, has these 2 one-off bugs. So I just kind of associate Pinsir and Heracross the same way a little bit. Now I'm doing all the Eevees, right? So you get a bunch of them. None in Gen 3, unfortunately. But you do get a lot there. And then to in out Generation 1, you got a bunch of fossils as well as legendaries. Fossils are consistent across Gen 1, 3, and 4. None in 2, unfortunately. So that's a bit of a struggle there. But you'll see here I'll get Dragonair, and then the last one, Lapras. And in about 8 minutes, I have gotten the first generation as well as a bunch of scattered Pokemon throughout the others. I'm going to try and do just sort of one generation at a time, just so I don't get too distracted, because I find hopping back and forth too much. You'll think of a Pokemon in your head, but then you'll think of something else, and you'll be like, oh, I'll get back to that. But then you never get back to it. So you're at the end of the quiz, and you're missing like 3 or 4, and you're like, who haven't I thought of? And chances are you already have thought of them. You just didn't remember, that you didn't type it down. So that's the important thing. Just stick one generation at a time, one line at a time. If you have another thought, that's fine, but make sure you finish your first thought. And then you can go back to it, which is neat. As far as the math, we're coming up roughly at the 11-minute mark, and you can see we're almost at 2:49. So we're about a minute ahead of schedule, which is pretty good. Also, considering we have a generation filled out, not bad at all. We still got a lot in Generation 3, but I think like out of the 4, Generation 3 is the one I am most confident in. I haven't done it the most. That honor goes to Gen 1. But the nice thing about Generation 3's Pokedex, and you'll see when we get to it a little bit, is that it's laid out in a way that makes sense. Like Generation 1 has a bunch of Pokemon that you encounter early on, but they're like halfway through the Pokedex. So like Tentacool and Tentacruel or the Geodude line, you see them super early, but they're like halfway down, which makes no sense, right? And then some guys that you don't begin until way later, like a Vulpix or Ninetales, are like super early. So I don't know what the deal with that is. Whereas Generation 3, you can almost like visualize the map of Hoenn and kind of break the Pokedex up into sections, like the pre-Petalburg stuff, Petalburg Woods, the desert, that kind of bike route as you're going to Mauville City and all the Pokemon that show up there. It's really easy to parse it out by location. The same cannot be true of Generation 2's. Like, it starts out fairly simple. You got Sentret for Hoot Noctowl, the early bugs. But then Lantern and Chinchou you're not going to see for a while. These babies don't show up at all. Togepi is an egg for a lot of the game. And then there's just not very many memorable lines in Gen 2 on their own. The ones I always remember, right? Ampharos line, Wooper Quagsire, Houndour Houndoom, Donphan and Phanpy. Those are like the boys. Every other line, no idea, right? Like I have to associate them to other stuff. Like the Hoppip line is just the main grass line. Slugma, Macargo, and Skarmory I remember more in Gen 3, which is why when I wrote them down, I threw a Spinda, Spoink, and Grumpig on there because they're all kind of in that ash route there. Yeah, and then a bunch of like one-offs or evolutions to prior Pokemon. It's really annoying. And we have 4 missing from Generation 2. Couldn't remember who they were, but rather than sitting there and trying to think of them on the spot, I'm like, look, 20 minutes, right? We got to be getting 25 every minute. I don't have time to sit here. So maybe it'll come back to me is the hope, right? But now I'm filling out early Generation 3. So you got Poochyena and Mightyena, which don't have an eye in them, right? Zigzagoon and Lanoon, who I often associate with Ferd and Sentret just because they're very similar Pokemon in my head. Surskit and Masquerain are a hard one to remember unless you play the games often because you do find them early, but they're kind of rare and they're not very good Pokemon, so a lot of people don't get them. And you have the Lotad line and the C-Dot line, two kind of, I associate them a little bit as polar opposites. Then you get into Petalburg Woods, Slackoth, Vigoroth, Slaking, all those boys. They're pretty cool. And at this point, I'm remembering Corphish and Cronut for whatever reason. I'm sure if you're watching this footage, you're like, why does he go from one random thing to another? I don't have time. I don't have time to reason out anything. The reason this is post-com is because the actual commentary is just me, like, saying random Pokemon names, and not really explaining myself at all because I'm on a time limit, right? I gotta hurry. Now I'm naming a bunch of the one-offs in Generation 3. There are a few. However, I find them to be a lot more memorable, and a lot of them kind of show up in the same area. So Chimecho's Mount Prior. Tropius is sort of toward Fortree City. Kecleon, also near Fortree. Absol, also kind of near there. Cast form. So even the one-offs are kind of bunched together in a way that makes sense. You do get a lot of legendaries in Gen 3 and Gen 4, so we're going to be getting a good bit of them fairly early. But before that, I'm like, hey, let's fill out some early Sinnoh stuff. I'd say the first 2 rows of Sinnoh Pokemon are pretty easy. It's just like starters, main bird, main rat. But then Kricketot and Kricketune I don't be remembering very well. And then the 3rd row is just like, I don't know. We threw the fossils in here for some reason. And I'll remember the Burmy line, but forget Badoo and Roserade, or forget Combi and Vespiquen, or forget Cherubi and Cherim. Like, to me, it would make more sense in any other generation. There would only be one of those lines. But in Gen 4, there's multiple. And they're all bunched up together like that. So, I don't know. That 3rd row is really confusing to me. The 4th row, too. I fucking despise the trio of Pachirisu, Spiritomb, and Chatot. Because unless you're doing quizzes like this, very often you're going to forget them. And, like, sure, Spiritomb's on Cynthia's team or whatever. There's, like, an epic Pachirisu moment in VGC. But, like, other than that, who the fuck remembering Chatot? Who remembering these goofballs? Not me. I guess Pachirisu's also the Pikachu clone for this generation. That might be a good way to remember them. You'll see me going a little bit off the first 4 generations, and there's a reason for that. One, I wanted to do the unknown section because there's only 2 Pokemon. I knew it was Meltan and Melmetal, which is pretty easy. 2, the reason I wrote Audino, Diancie, and Greninja is a fun fact regarding Mega Evolutions. So every Mega in Pokemon up until this point is in the first 4 generations, except for 3 Pokemon. And those 3 are Audino with Mega Audino, Diancie, and the Count Ash Greninja as a Mega as well. So um, me writing those 3 out separately are basically like me trying to get the Mega Evolution section cleared, just because it's nice to have another thing cleared, like why not? 3 Pokemon to remember just out of nowhere isn't too much of a strain on me. Now we're filling out more of the Gen 4 legendaries, which makes me go back to get the other Reggies. They're fairly easy, right? You get the Lake Trio, then you get Creation Trio. Regigigas is pretty easy if you've already done the regular Reggies. Darkrai and Cresselia are kind of a pair. Manaphy, Fione, and Shaman are kind of the mascot Pokemon, your Jirachi or your Mew of that generation. And then it's like Arceus and Heatran are the last 2. They don't really have like a real connection, but Arceus is super memorable, and I think Heatran's pretty cool too. So there you go. The crummy thing about Gen 4, in my opinion, and the way its Pokedex is sort of ordered, is every generation, and you can see it in 1, 2, and 3, does a similar thing where it's like legendaries and the pseudos are always right next to each other. So in Gen 1, it's Articuno, Zapdos, Moltres, the Dragonair line, or Dratini line, then Mewtwo, right? Generation 2, same thing. Entei, Raikou, Suicune, Tyranitar line, and then the, Ho, Lugia, Celebi. Gen 3, you get 2 pseudo-legendaries, but they still put them right next to the legendaries. So you got Bagon, Shelgon, Salamence, the Beldum line, and then all the legendaries. Gen 4, no, they don't do that at all. The legendaries are at the end, but the pseudo, the Gible, Gabite, and Garchomp is just in the middle of the fucking decks, which makes no sense. Instead, they put all of the evolutions to earlier Pokemon at the end of the decks, which is mad confusing. And even then, they don't bunch them all up together. You'll notice Ambipom, Mismagius, and Honchkrow are like separated off into the earlier part of the decks and are not with the rest of their group. Which is confusing because like I look at that bottom row to check which region I'm missing from, because they're mostly kept together, right? You got Magnezone, Licky Licky, Rhyperior, Tangrowth, Electivire, Magmortar. That's the Gen 1s. Then you got Togekiss and you had Mega, but then Mismagius and Honchkrow are also up there, but then Ambipom's also up there. And then it's the Eevees for some reason, and then Mamoswine and Porygon Z, which is another Gen 1 one. And then they finally have the gall to be like, okay, let's put all the Gen 3 ones together. So you get Gallade, Probopass, Dusknoir, and Frostlass. And here I'm remembering the last 2 I'm missing are also evolutions. So it's Sneasel, Weavile, Gligar, Gliscor. Riolu and Lucario are the last of the 2 Mega Evolutions. And then I'm filling out the last ones is Drifloon, Drifblim, Hippopotas, and Hippowdon. And I'm like, yo, I did it! Not realizing that I didn't write Heatran down. I'm like, why isn't it green yet? I'm looking, I'm like, oh, Heatran. And with that, we've done it. With 1 minute and 38 to spare, I've reached my 498. So why am I still going? Well, it's the full quiz, right? So I'm just listing Pokemon for fun. The goal is to get to like 525 and say, hey, I've gotten more than half of all the Pokemon in 20 minutes. So I'm just naming starters, which are fairly easy to do. Some Generation 3 guys I want to complain about real quick. Roselia, very hard to remember unless you're doing a quiz like this. I always get Meditite and Medicham. Like I either forget about them or just only get Makuhita and Hariyama. Don't know why. Super forgettable Pokemon. Love Disc is hard until you realize that all the dive Pokemon are next to each other, so you can do Clamperl, Huntail, Gorbis, Relicanth, then throw Love Disc in there, which isn't too bad. If you get Chimecho, good on you. But then also remember that in Gen 4, you got fucking Chingling. The babies in Gen 4 are super forgettable. Chingling, Mantike, Bonsly, Mime Jr. and Happiny, just all over the place. Super hard to remember. I thought the same for the Generation 2 babies, but weirdly they're more memorable to me. I don't know why. And make sure you get your fossils. You can also throw in Baltoy and Claydol because Steven has them, and then that leads you to some of the desert Pokemon, which can lead to Aeron and Aggron. And then some other one-off ones at least got megas like Sableye. And Nose Pass is tricky to remember. The way I do it is gym leaders, right? So Roxanne has one. That's the same for Solrock and Lunatone. Going through gym leaders is helpful for like all generations except for Gen 2. But yeah, we did it. 528 Pokemon in 20 minutes. Hopefully this post-com was entertaining. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. Maybe I'll tackle the later generations in a future video. But I got to get back to memorizing them because they take a long time. All right. Bye-bye, everybody.